Right, we have the three Retinettes here. The earliest type, mid-production and late type. And these ones have all had their shutters serviced, but now it's time to service the bodies. So what I propose to do is to just pop these two aside, and I will video the process of stripping down and servicing this one. And when I strike a part that's going to be different on the other cameras, I'll drag them in and show you the differences. But basically they're all very similar in the body, so there shouldn't be much to say about that. I've just had to run through this again because my video camera had a video memory card error. But basically I'm just going to remove the lens and shutter from this one. This one of course has the flash connection, so I'm going to have to disconnect that. So a small screwdriver is needed. I will pop that shutter. It's shims, and the retaining ring, I'll pop them to one side. We'll get onto the camera body. Now all the cameras of this type, the top is all the same. Put something through the fork of the rewind, spin the rewind knob off. That's all you need to do. You don't need to use a tool on that just to get it off the camera. If you want to take it apart so that you can clean the washer in there, you will need to take that thing apart. So, two screws at this end of the top cover, one screw right on the end. We'll get that off. The screws are all chrome plated brass, easily damaged. Take care when getting the screws off. Top cover just lifts straight off. You can lift off the film reset button. Don't lose its return spring. You can lift the shutter release button off the top of the shutter release shaft. The shutter release shaft should come out and it should bring a spring with it, so take it out slowly. Yeah, there's the return spring on the shaft. Normally they're stuck fairly well with a bit of grease. The front panel, two screws. Now this will quite possibly have two felt pads underneath it. They're just there to take the rock out of this so that it fixes back firmly. They don't serve any other purpose. Put that to one side. The shutter release arm here can be lifted straight out. And this is the cocking piece that cocks the shutter. Now this is slightly different in this model than it is in the earliest model, so I'll just pause here and show you what they're like. Okay, so this is the shutter release piece out of the early model, and it's not entirely obvious here, but there's a thick piece to the shaft here, and it only comes down to the narrow piece of the shaft right there, and there's likewise the hole in the body matches that. So there's quite a deep counter bore in there for for that. So that's just on the earlier models. And on this one, its cocking action is exactly the same as the later one. So I'll pop that to one side, back where we were. Just connect these pieces up, put them to one side, right at the top of the camera. What do we want to do here? Well, I'm going to take the strap lugs off at both ends. And this is because I'm stripping the camera right down in order to service it. Or at least I'm stripping it down as far as it's practical to strip the camera down. I don't know yet whether we'll strike problems at the bottom of the camera. Some of them, particularly the early models, the Leatherettes on the bases are glued very, very firmly in position, and your chances of getting the leatherette off in one piece in that case are not good. And that might mean that I don't strip the camera right down completely. I'll just strip it down as far as I can, right? So I'm just pulling these pieces apart. Now, this post here for our rewind, now that's actually different on the earliest cameras, and I'll bring it back in and we'll show you. I'll just retrieve it from this body. On the earliest ones, you'll see that this is split. It's got cuts through here. That's folded in to grip the rewind shaft. On the later ones, that's not split, it's solid, but it has a groove cut through on the inside edge, about halfway up, and there's a little inserted piece in there. A little brass or copper coloured spring section, which serves the same purpose, but it means that the piece itself is probably stronger because it doesn't have a cut through it, weakening it. So that's the difference between the early and the late there. Otherwise there's no other practical difference. Right, continuing on with this teardown. We can take this piece off. This is the shaft that connects up the film advance to the little cocking rack inside the camera. So this lifts off, and in this late model camera, this arm is hooked in there and it lifts off like that. On the early examples, it's different. We have a screw here instead, so I'll just lift this piece off at this end, and we have a screw here. So you may well find that you've got that to deal with the early models. I'm doing my best not to get muddled up here with these two cameras. Okay, so carrying on with this, these pieces are all the same. Take the washer off. Take the pieces of the film advance off. Now these pieces are all the same here as they would be on a Retina 3C camera of the same vintage. This should come off. Yes. All this is a bit sticky with dried grease. So we have a screw here. That's where you would have the big shoulder screw on a Retina 3C camera to support the rack. But of course there's no rack here to support. We can remove this screw and I'll just recover the spring from that so that it doesn't go through the cleaner and get lost. So we've got the screw here. Let's get these pieces apart. The screw, the little pawl which stops the film advance from backing up, and the standoff or spacer that goes underneath. What else? So let's get to the bottom of the camera. So here I want to strip off these pieces, the Leatherettes may or may not behave. Let's start with the advanced lever. See if I can get my scalpel under that. Leatherette, that's coming off easily. Bit of corrosion there, that white stuff, that's corrosion products. 3 screws hold the advanced lever. Oh, that's tight too. And that. And that. That's a bit unusual. Okay, let's get this off anyway while we're here. This is the back catch release cover and tripod sockets around. Lift off that surround. I don't normally put those through the ultrasonic cleaner. The aluminium doesn't like the ammonia based cleaner that I'll put things through. And there's the return spring. And I don't usually put that through the cleaner because if I did, the black paint and the little arrowhead there would all disappear very well. Okay, so these screws here, I need to get them loose. I'm going to try it with a little touch of solvent on there first to see if that makes any difference. I'll just put a little drop of acetone on there. Let that work for a minute, or a few seconds at least, and see if those screws will come loose. They are really reluctant. It's unusual for the screws to be that tight. Now I'm going to have to use percussive techniques on that one. Okay, a bit of percussion here and we'll see what happens. It's not working. I'm applying a bit of torque to that and none of those screws are coming loose. I'm reluctant to thump hard at this because I don't want to loosen the disc on the bottom of the film advance shaft. It certainly seems possible to me that someone's put Loctite or something on those screws, which wouldn't have been a helpful thing to do. Okay, the next trick I'm going to try. I'll clean this stuff up quite well and I'm going to put a soldering iron on those screws, one after another, heat them right up and try and get the screws loose. I'll do that off camera. I have one of the screws moving. It's extremely stiff. I don't really know what to make of that. it could be corrosion, it could just be rusted in, but there's something all up the shaft of that screw. That's one of the screws anyway. One of the others, I've worked on one of them, I haven't got it to move at all. This was the second screw that I had a go at getting off. That thread is brown. Now I don't know whether the brown I'm seeing there is rust or whether it's something that was put on there. That's very unusual back when I have success. The second screw is moving. No, it's going to require more work than this. Well, I got the second screw out. It's the same as the first. It's covered in white powdery rubbish and rust underneath that. I honestly think that that's some sort of adhesive's been used on there, that someone's put glue on those screws and then run them in. So I've still got one to get loose. Well, I suppose 2 out of 3 ain't bad. Well, I think there's nothing else for it now but for me to drill the head off that screw, dismantle everything, and then hope that I can get a vice grips or something else on the shaft of the screw and encourage it out once it's all in pieces. I think that's the best option at this stage. I don't want to ruin what I've got here, so we'll sacrifice one screw. Back shortly. Well, that didn't exactly go as planned, but we have the lever off. The lever's in one piece and can be reused. That screw was absolutely seized in here. There was no danger it was coming out. There's a lot of corrosion product on that aluminium there. So it was not only seized in the steel here, it was also seized in the aluminium here. So that's some pretty severe problem there. I drilled through the countersunk head, but it wouldn't come loose. I levered it up. Basically I've pulled some of this out of, I've pulled this up out of shape. That'll go back. But it's fair to say it hasn't been playing the game. Right, so the screw you can still see stuck here. It never showed any signs of coming loose from there. That's rusted completely in. I'll remove this chrome trim now, assuming that I can. So these screws are coming out without any fuss. And these are just nickel plated steel screws running into the aluminium housing through the chrome plated brass trim. That one looks a bit funny. Certainly got some corrosion around it, but it did come out. Let's take that off. Okay. Lift out the release lever. And let's take the rewind button off. Got a pair of pliers for doing that. plate came loose without a great fight. Just take the screw out that holds the sprocket shaft to the sprocket. You can push up the sprocket shaft and remove that, and remove the sprocket. Now this has just come out. This is the bush from the top of the film advance shaft, and this is the clutch. So I'll just pull that apart. Let's have a look what we've got here. There's a bit of rust and evidence here on that spring for the rewind button lock spring. That screw came out without any problems. Now we have 3 screws in here that hold the rewind, the advance shaft plate to the body. Let's see what those screws are like. Can't even see them yet. There's a lot of rust and dirt down in there. Should be one about there. Here's one. That's coming loose. That one doesn't want to come loose. Neither does that one. Alright, more work I'd say. Let's see if I can shift them with my impact driver, I call this screwdriver. I can pick up the head of that screw. Not finding the slot. It's there to be seen. It's corroded in there. I think we're going to be needing a few parts for this one. Okay, it's out, and I was able to get the screw loose. There was just enough sticking out for me to get onto that with the pliers. So the screw was certainly rusted in to the film advance shaft here. The end of that's still on firmly. I'm really surprised considering the amount of thumping I've had to give it. The 3 screws that held that plate into the body, one of them came out fairly easily. The other 2 I used some CRC 556, which is pretty much like WD-40. Let that soak for a bit, and then I used my impact driver screwdriver, and I was able to get those 2 remaining screws loose, but they fought all the way. They certainly didn't want to come loose. So this one's a bit of a mystery. I'll clean all this stuff up. Everything else appears to be coming apart normally. Let's see if the tripod socket is there. The screws holding the tripod socket are loose. We'll have them out straight away. Now you're exceptionally unlikely to find a camera that is as reluctant to come apart as this one. This one's just cursed. So I want to take this piece out of the front of the camera. We've got 2 screws at the base, and miraculously they're loose. 2 screws at the top, countersunk head screw here, and a fairly flat round head screw there. See if this will slide out. It will. Okay, and there's the little curved rack that cocks the shutter. This is all full of sand and rubbish. And we've got the baffle here in the body. So all of this needs to be cleaned, get rid of all that filth. Now, on the earlier models, it can be a fight getting this out, and the secret is that this piece here needs to be slid all the way over so that it drops down into that hollow, and that will allow you to pull that section out of the body. Anyway, all this stuff is very dirty and filthy, and I'll put the pieces aside for cleaning now. All the mechanical pieces will be cleaned in the ultrasonic cleaner. They'll get one go through. We're using a wax and grease remover, and then they'll get one go through the cleaner with a domestic ammonia-based detergent. And at that stage all the pieces should be nice and clean and ready to go again. Just looking at this base plate here, because it sort of got a bit pulled out of shape while I was fighting with that film advance lever there. I'll have to make sure that that sits nice and flat. This is just brass, it's quite thin. It shouldn't be hard to push that back into place. Let me sort these pieces and get them cleaned.